Today on Cooking with a Lion, we'll be making one of my favorite one-pot wonder wintertime stews. Plus, I'll be sharing with you my method for dicing an onion that is far easier than what I learned in culinary school. And it's all happening right now. Let's get started. The first thing we'll do for this recipe, like many recipes, is dice some onions, which brings so much sweetness and flavor to it. But as I learned in culinary school, it can be a bit difficult to get that perfect dice. Normally, as you've seen on television, you take your knife and you slice it this way, parallel a couple of times, keeping your fingers well away from the blade, and then you turn it toward yourself and you slice straight down. You've seen it, right? And then you turn it again and then slice straight through, cleaving off these perfect little dice. But the problem with that method is that this whole time, my fingertips are holding the very end. I can't get past my hand, which means that I'm left with this little, maybe 3/4 to 1 inch nub that I have to again chop and dice and hope for the best. I'm gonna make it so much more simple than that. I'm gonna do everything in 2 steps instead of 3, utilizing the entire onion. So I'm gonna start by taking the onion, I've already cut the ends off and then cut it in half. And I'm gonna take the onion and I'm gonna make sure that the parallel lines are away from me, okay? Not this way, but away from me, perpendicular. And I'm gonna go for a 1/4 inch dice. It's gonna be really easy to see because all I'm doing is taking the knife 1/4 inch from the end and I'm cutting straight down. Really easy. And then I'm gonna move it over a 1/4 inch. All I have to do is make sure I'm looking down on the blade, and all of these dice, or cuts right now, are all a 1/4 inch. Now all I have to do is turn it 90 degrees, okay? I'm right-handed. And I'm gonna go in and cut a very shallow cut toward the middle, and then every single consecutive cut is gonna be moving the knife up and then cutting straight down until I get about just past halfway. And I'm gonna tilt the whole thing over and do the exact movement again. Watch this. 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch. Okay, I can't go any further because I'm right-handed, so my arm actually doesn't do that. So what I will do is tip this whole thing over, bloop, like that, and it's just like starting all over again. So I'm gonna hold it together, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch. Now the great thing about this is you get these perfect little diamonds. It's pretty darn close to a square or a dice, but these diamonds are beautiful. They cook uniformly, and that's what we're looking for, a uniform cook or cut, so they don't have really big chunks and tiny little slivers. All of this in just 2 cuts instead of 3. Now all I have to do is finish cutting the rest of these onions, pop it in the pot, and I'll move on to the fennel. Now when it comes to fennel, lucky for us, it grows essentially the same way that an onion grows. You have these leaves or petals that grow in these concentric that sort of overlap and they go from the bottom to the top. So what I want to do is just get rid of this hard bottom portion, right? This little stem end. Can't use that. You can actually use it for stock if you wanted to. And then I'll also chop off the top, these harder little celery-like stems, if you will. Probably won't break down unless you braise them for a long period of time, so we can save that for stock as well. So we're left with something that looks a lot like an onion, and I'll approach it the same way that I did with that onion. I'll cut it in half, I cut the top and the bottom off, and I'll place it on its side, okay? And just like those parallel cuts we did earlier, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, a 1/4 inch, and a little less than a 1/4 inch, but we're okay. Do a little turn, and then cut toward the center, moving the knife from the bottom to the top, okay? When you get that high that you can't bring the knife any further, all I'll do is just tilt the whole thing over and then do our best to hold it together and continue cutting, okay? 1 or 2 little nubs and we're good to go. And just like the onion, we have the same essentially sized pieces, which is really lovely for continuity. None of the pieces are going to burn, and none of the pieces will be undercooked. It already smells really sweet in here. It's like a little bit of an anise or a licoricey flavor, and that is from the fennel. It just smells wonderful. Now all I have to do is add a bit of salt, some kosher salt. And this is going to help the cooking process. It helps soften up the cell structure of those vegetables. But we also want it to cook faster. You can maybe get a little bit of caramelization, and that's where extra virgin olive oil comes into play. 3 delicious tablespoons of that. Now I'm going to put this over medium heat, and I'm going to cook it, stirring occasionally until the onions start to get a little soft and slightly translucent. From there, we're going to add the real foundation of flavor in this stew, which is some garlic, cumin, a little bit of coriander, so floral, some cinnamon, and some fresh orange zest. I'm going to stir that for about a minute until you really start to smell those flavors. Then at that point, we add some sweet potatoes, dried fruit, which is some dried apricots, prunes, and dried figs, a little bit of honey to sweeten it up, a couple cans of chickpeas, and some chicken stock. Now, I want this all to come to a simmer, so we'll increase the heat just to a simmer and just slowly let it cook until the sweet potatoes are barely tender. At that point, we add Swiss chard, and we'll cook that until the greens are just barely tender. Whenever I make this stew for family and friends, they always comment, there's a lot of good stuff in here. It's not nothing. It is chock full of, dare I say, fruits and vegetables. If this is what my parents had in mind when they said eat more fruits and vegetables as a kid, I'd be all over it, to be honest with you. It smells wonderful. I can definitely smell the cinnamon, maybe a little bit of orange zest. Let's dig in and try our first bite. The first bite is like easing into a nice warm bubble bath. There's nothing stopping you from wanting to go in for more. It's really super pleasant. It's not overly sweet at all. I mean, yes, we have a lot of dried fruit in there and we have a little bit of honey, but the flavor profile of sweetness goes from barely sweet at all, which is like that cinnamon, which is like a hint of a thought of sweetness, all the way through the dried fruit. And then the stock is actually sweetened with the sweet potato. It's a lovely transition, but it's not just sweet. You have the onion, but you also have that cumin, and then the chard. The Swiss chard really grounds the whole thing out in addition to those chickpeas, which is like earthy. There's so much going on, and yet it's so darn simple to do. You know what it reminds me of? Moroccan food. It reminds me of the Moroccan-like sweet and savory play that they have in those meals, which I love so much. And one of the surprising things is, even though it's so substantial, it's really equally as healthy. And I always feel really good after eating a big bowl. And I hope that when you make it, you feel really good too. Cheers.